All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks for coming back. I'd like to just get right to our next session with Miss Olivia Nunn.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so very much, and thanks for the invitation to be here this morning. For those of you that don't know me, I am Olivia Nunn. I am a retired lieutenant colonel, and I was a PAO once upon a time in your seat doing this very thing, messaging on behalf of the United States Army. So it's good to be back with my fellow PAOs. Today, I'm going to talk about a topic of podcasting. For many of you, it's not a new concept, but for others, it can be for your organization. Next slide. So why podcasting, right? Podcasting isn't necessarily new, but a lot of organizations want to bring it in, but really don't know how. And I get asked often, how do you do it? So why am I the one bringing this conversation to you? Some of you guys might know who I am. Before I retired, I served as the U.S. Army Soldier for Life Public Affairs Officer. And in that capacity, I was the Soldier for Life podcast host. And in that capacity, I got to bring so much great content to the military community. And with that, a lot of trial and error. And I got to learn about this great concept. And I got to bring what I learned about podcasting to the Military Officers Association of America. So I kind of know what I'm talking about. And I actually do podcasting on my own. So I'm going to walk you through all these great things that I've learned. But I don't want today's session this morning to just be me talking at you. I want this to be interactive because that's the only way you're going to learn. So I want you to ask me your questions, right? Because that's how you learn. You got to jump right in. So this is what I'm going to cover today. Next slide. So why should your unit start a podcast? And again, I get asked this question at least, 100 times a week across my various social media platforms because I am on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and across those platforms, I get messaged that quite often. So let's jump right into it. Why should your unit do a podcast? Next slide. So who listens to podcasts in here, in this room? So more than half of you. Well, for those that didn't raise a hand, why don't you listen to a podcast? Just curious. Shout it out.
Don't have time.
Don't have time? Okay.
Not in the habit of it.
Okay. What else?
I honestly don't know anything about it.
Really? Mm-hmm. Okay. So podcast, actually, oddly enough, for the person that said you don't have time, is actually the reason why podcasts are so popular. It's a way to consume information because you can fit the way you consume information at the way you want to. Because you can stop how you consume information, right? Think about how when you watch a TV show, especially a live TV show or news, right? You have to be attentive to that. You've got to listen to it. And if it's live, you've got to be paying attention. And you're like, wait a minute, what did that newscaster just say? And if you weren't paying attention and if you missed it, you're like, crap, I got to watch the replay. And if you don't have time and if you forget because you've got a million things that you've got to do in your job, you probably forgot to go back, right? And in our business as PAOs, where the news cycle is 24/7 and things are coming at you at 100 miles an hour, that one piece that newscaster said was probably the most important thing that you were supposed to catch, right? But with podcasting, you can literally stop it, rewind that few seconds and go, oh, that was the most important thing I was supposed to catch, and now I just caught it. That one simple thing, the ability to start and stop, rewind, fast forward, or you know what, this person's just going on and on about something I don't care about, I can fast forward that segment, is one simple piece why podcasting itself is such a powerful tool. That's just one reason why podcast is powerful. podcast listeners consume so much of the bandwidth of part of the social space that we listen to. There are over 132 podcasts out there. 132 million. It sounds like a lot, right? When you think about all the data that's out there. However, don't let that number scare you off. For those of you that are in here and you understand social media, who thinks in here they think that they're a social media expert? Right? You should be as PAOs, right? And when we talk about social media, you should understand the general concept, right? You should understand your audience, right? Understand the flow of social media. And you should understand the general dynamic of social media. But here's the nice thing about podcasts. It's the only part of the social aspect where the more niche you go, the more powerful you can become. That's the only part of the social aspect that the more niche you go, the more powerful you can become. How cool is that? And that actually makes it really interesting and dynamic for your unit. And for many people who have anxiety about all the other aspects of messaging, this is the one place that you can actually control. That one piece that you want to own. And that makes it very enticing. So again, don't let that large number about podcasts scare you from not doing podcasts for your unit. The other part is you can multitask, right? Again, because of that piece of being able to start, stop, doing other things. Here's the other part. Majority of your listeners, they do podcasts from doing daily chores. Many people do podcasts from folding laundry, doing dishes. A lot of people listen to their podcasts on their daily commute. And come on, we're in the National Capital Region. We are commuters. Commuting is part of our life. It consumes, on average, 2 hours of our daily life, right? What better way of consuming information than on our daily commute? And what better way for your unit to get out its message to its members than on a daily commute, than through a podcast? And here's the thing, a podcast doesn't have to be lengthy. It doesn't have to be the Joe Rogan show that goes on for an hour and a half every single day. You can control the length, the speed, the time, and how many times your podcast is going to be. And we'll get into that. And that's the beauty of podcast. You control the message. So again, these are all the cool pieces of why podcasts can be so powerful and why your unit should be utilizing this incredible and very powerful tool in your arsenal. Any questions? All right, next slide. Here's the other piece. It's a great mentoring tool. It's a great piece for your unit to use as an active listening tool, right? And here's the other way. Don't think of podcasting from a very traditional aspect. You have tools that are out there that you can use from a podcasting perspective, right? Our social platforms are changing and evolving in so many different ways all the time. Let's use Instagram. Instagram Live. You can use that from a semi-podcasting type platform, right? It allows you on the spot to be able to tap into your audience, right? On the spot, go Instagram Live, your Command Sergeant Major can talk about something that's on his mind, and to be able to talk about a quick piece, and allows your soldiers to come back and be able to talk right back to the Sergeant Major, right? And if you're consistent with that, that's a great way to have a dialogue. So think outside the box. Don't allow the platform to dictate on how you are going to message. Utilize the tool to your advantage. The important part is make sure that your soldiers understand the tools that you're using. And that is where you use your skills as a PAO when you message. Does that make sense? Next slide. So, how do you get started? What equipment do you need? Next slide. So, this is what a basic podcast setup looks like, right? For many of you, you've got one part of it already, which is the laptop. Now, word of caution. I would highly, if you don't already get that part, have your own laptop. Don't use a government one. Because I've learned that the hard way. Get your own laptop. Okay, there, I said it. Next slide. So this is my setup at my home. I've invested my own money, and here's why. Because I believed in the mission when I did podcasting on behalf of U.S. Army Soldier for Life. So I'm going to tell you what it costs to start, right? If your unit doesn't want to spend the money from their own budget and you believe in the mission and you want to get started, and then what I paid for out of my own pocket because I believed in the mission. But hopefully your unit believes in the mission and they're willing to spend the budget, right? So here's what I did. All right, I've got some fancy headphones just because anybody follows me on social media, it's what I do, right? I believe audio is the most important part. The crispness of the audio on the back end is very important, right? It's not what you hear, it's what the audience hears, right? So you have to invest in what your mic is doing, right? So USB plugged in mic is cheap. So you could start in around $500. So that's the microphone, that's the headset, right? That assuming that you already have a laptop. You've got to invest in the microphone. And there's plenty of companies out there that you can invest in microphones. Rode, I have a Shure, right? That's a 7MB microphone. That runs about $400. Again, it's because it's the type of microphone and it's the sound quality, and that is what you're looking for. And anybody who's an audio technician can attest to that. Because here's the other reason. When it comes to editing, and when you start pushing out your audio content to platforms, and you want the like radio stations, and you want other platforms to pick up your podcast, the better platforms want that rich quality audio. And they're only going to pick up quality content. And that is going to be the difference between your content and the ones that stay down here. And that's why I highly encourage you to invest in that quality equipment. So again, I'm not saying go all out and spend all that money. You can, tier your way through. If you listen to Soldier for Life from season 1 to season 3, there was a progression. We started off at the bottom because we were just building ourselves. We were just trying to see, can we do this? Can we prove our concept? Is there a need? Are soldiers going to listen to us? And we proved it with season 1. There was such a demand. We built it, we did it, and all of a sudden everyone's like, where are you guys? We want it. We want to listen to you guys. Keep building the season. So we improved our audio quality. So if season 1 for you guys is just a plug-in microphone, and you can prove that your unit wants it, and then you build from there, that's okay. But if you want to go all out in season 1, by all means do that. But again, just letting you guys know why audio quality is important. So everything plugs into some kind of platform. For me here, that's a Scarlett 4i4. If you are an audio technician and you love doing that, you don't necessarily have to do something like that. There are other platforms. For me, I'm not all into that. I just wanted something simple. And here's the other thing. I lost hearing. Thank you, Army. I'm disabled there. I can't hear some of the tones, so I don't want to mess with all the EQ and all that other setting. I don't want to figure that out. That 4i4 does it for me. It just sets all of that, balances it all out, and that's why I use that. Figure out what works for you. There are people that love to do that, so you could figure out the tool that best makes sense for you. So there are ways in which you can figure out and the budget that makes sense for you. Me, I like KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. For me, that works for me. But again, what works for you maybe doesn't work for me. Just figure it out. It doesn't take a whole lot to get started. These are just ways to do it. You don't necessarily need 2 screens like I do. I'm just a screen person. In fact, I actually had 3 screens at one point because that's just me. Just more important is get started, right? Any questions so far? All right, next slide. So then after you kind of get your equipment going, right? And you built it, you've got this idea, you're telling your unit, we're gonna do this. We've got all this equipment, we're invested, we've got a podcast idea, we even got a name for it. That's the fun part, right? Figuring out a name. If you saw at the beginning of my slide, mentoring beyond the boots, right? Come up with a name that best makes sense for your unit. Could even be your unit's motto. Whatever it is, have fun with it, right? Don't be so boring with it. Whatever it may be. You need to stream your podcast. You need to find a method. This is where the cost comes in, because you can't just pump it out from your laptop. That doesn't work. You have to somehow stream it. For me, I particularly, when I was doing it with Soldier for Life, I use Libsyn. Libsyn is not a bad service. Now that I do it with MOA, I use Buzzsprout. There are different platforms out there. Buzzsprout has been the #1 for years. I just like Buzzsprout a lot better than Libsyn, right? Don't let me dictate to what makes sense for you. Do your homework. There are lots of platforms out there. But let me back up. How do we even get there, right? How do we even get to these streaming services? Well, you have to record an episode. So let's start there. Next slide. Next slide. So let me back up. So before we figure out how we get to your formatting, right? You had this idea, you figured out your podcast, you figured out you're going to do it, you've got the name of it. How does it even begin? Right? You had this conversation. Because this is the part that a lot of people don't really know what the magic behind the scenes are. Right? They just see, oh, I saw 2 people on a screen, and now I hear this thing, right? This episode that I've downloaded on Apple iTunes or Spotify or wherever else I capture my podcast from. So this is the magic behind the scenes. This is the work that gets done. I, the podcast host, find some kind of story. It's the same work that you do as a PAO in getting a story, right? You find a cool narrative, a cool pitch, and I go after it, right? In fact, this season for MOA, I'm recording season 3. And in that season, it's all about stories from the front, from Iraq and Afghanistan. A lot of them are Silver Star recipients. And it's their narrative, their stories from the war. And I'm listening to them telling me their war stories. So it's me and them having a conversation. And if you listen to my podcast when I was with Soldier for Life, that was my style. And it's always been the way that I wanted to drive the conversation. Two friends catching up over a cup of coffee at Starbucks. We just happen to have headphones on. So it goes like this. I'm going to send you a link. You must have a computer, headphones, and a quiet room. And we're going to give you a date and time that we're going to agree upon. You're going to click on that link. We both come onto that link. We're going to use whatever platform. Like I said, I use Buzzsprout now. I use a service called Squadcast. Squadcast looks, feels, and looks like Zoom, but it's made specifically for podcasting. So think Zoom in your head, right? You click on that link. We both pop up on a screen. And then I go over some preliminary information, just like you do as PAOs, right? Did I get your name right? Can I say your name right? These are the data that I have on you. This is the things we're going to talk about. Make sure my left and right limits. All the good things that you do as a PAO, all those rules still apply. Even though that I'm out of the Army, right? I still use all those good training tips, right? The only difference is I could punch a little harder. I could say a few more words, and I don't have to worry about some of the things that I worried about in the Army so much, right? But I still use those good training tips. And then I hit record, and away we go, and we have that conversation. I like to stick to a script of about 20 to about 45 minutes long, and I watch the timer. Two old friends having a good conversation. And that's it. I don't script it. I let the conversation go where I think it needs to go. And then I thank them for their time, and then I end it. That's it. And what I caution them and I tell them is, it's a one shot, one kill. Unless they absolutely tank it, then, I might re-record it. But for the most part, that's what I do. Because I want to capture the story at the heart of where it's at. I want to capture the story at its realness, at its authentic, true self. Because that's what I preach. Be your authentic self. And that's why I don't script it. Because who wants to hear a robotic story? Because you can hear it. Just because you don't see it, you can hear it. And here's the other part. Podcasts can also be video format. I record my screen, and I tell them that. I make sure that they know that my podcasts are also audio and video. Because I take that content when I'm recording that screen, and I use that content on social media as teasers. Check out our upcoming podcast that I did with so-and-so, and this is what it's going to do. My long term is that whole entire story is going to be out on YouTube. And everybody, by the way, everybody wants to be Joe Rogan. Everybody wants to get to the Joe Rogan standard. That's the gold standard, right? To get to a true TV video production, right, to what Joe Rogan does, is very different from an audio podcast. It's a completely different narrative. It's a completely different cost model, right? Costs a whole lot more. I'm not saying you can't do it. It just costs different. But there's ways around it. Think outside the box. Record your screen. Take snippets of that recording and use that. Use that in your stories on social media. Use that in your highlight reels. There are different ways in which you can drive that and capture that and push that, right? Those are parts of your messaging. Got it? So now let's talk about the format. Next slide. So I kind of talked about this in this piece, right? 20 to 30-minute weekly episodes. Again, you don't have to do weekly. You could do it maybe once a month or a couple times a quarter. This is where your unit can decide where you think it's best. I would not recommend once a quarter, because then what are you gaining out of that, right? That time is a little too long. Maybe once or twice a month, right? But whatever it is that you do, the same rules apply like other social media. Once you do it, you got to feed the beast. You can't stop it, but be consistent with it. That rule still applies. But you can decide what it is that best makes sense. And then decide how you're going to do it. You know, is it an interview style? Is it a question and A back and forth, right? How many people are you going to have on your show? You can determine that. Is it going to be just you and the other person? Is it you and 2 other people? Again, these are your rules. No one makes the rules but you. There's no set of standards. You get to make those standards. And that's the cool part of podcast, which makes it really fun, right? It's just a matter of how much headache are you willing to deal with? Because the more voices you add on, it's more work for you on the editing side. Just something to think about. That's why I typically try to keep it just to me and that one guest. Sometimes I might add me and 2 other people, but I really try to keep it just to me and the guest because it all has to do with the editing part. And then what is a season, right? If you notice some podcasts, they don't have seasons. They just keep going with episodes. Episode 1, now it's episode 300. There's no rules, right? Again, it's just the way that they want to do it. Or maybe it's a season, right? A season could be 10 episodes. It could be 15 episodes, and then it's a new season. Again, it's however you decide. A season could be 3 months long. It could be 5 months long. You get to decide what best makes sense for your unit, right? It could be based on a calendar, a fiscal calendar, the actual calendar itself. Again, however best makes sense to your unit. And then is there a theme, right? Some units want to do a theme to that. When I was with Soldier for Life, we did it based on certain themes, right? It was because Soldier for Life was a lot about transitioning. So we focused a lot on maybe this theme was about education. And then the next time it was about businesses and jobs. So again, what makes sense for your unit? Next slide. So the planning process, right? This is the part you have to stick to. When you stick to this planning process, it helps your flow. This allows you to be able to stick to your cycle, which is your season interviews, locking in your recording schedule, your episodes, and how you edit. This is the best way to do it. And the best way to do it is you figure out what your schedule's going to be, you figure out who you're going to interview, you lock them in, and then you go balls to the walls. And what do I mean by that? You try to record everybody that you want in that season in about a 2-week window. And then you record them. And here's why. Once you record them all, then you just go into editing queue, and then you're done. And that allows you the breadth and the time and the space to go into editing and then just start releasing. And then once you do that, it allows you to go back into that phase again of researching for the next season. What happens is when I first started doing this, what I was doing is I would go find somebody, catch them, interview them, record them, stick them out. And then I'd have to hurry up, go find somebody, record them, edit them, put them out. See what I was doing? I was constantly, and I never had a bench. And what would happen is if that person couldn't interview with me because they got sick or I got sick or we had a problem with the interview, the tape got jacked up or whatever, I was screwed. I was literally, there was a couple times I was hosed. I had to release something and I had nothing. And I was like, shit. And I would literally like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And I would have to like phone a friend, like, do you have time? I literally need to record right now. Like, what am I going to do? So don't put yourself in a bind. If you put yourself and lock yourself in and record everybody in a 2-week session, and if something happens, you've given yourself all this time. Or if something happens, like something cool or a VIP comes in and you have an opportunity to record somebody, now you can grab them and you can shuffle around your deck and say, you know what, I'm going to bump this person. I can move them to another season. Or, you know what, this actually sounds better because I realized, oh, this is the month of the military child, or this is the month of mental health, or whatever. I can move this person around. It gives you that flexibility and you're not in that mode of, crap, I've just stuck myself in a jam. And that's why putting yourself in that zone of doing the work up front gives you that bench. And I didn't understand that first season. So it's important that if you do that work up front, it gives you so much breath in the backspace. Hopefully that makes sense. Next slide. So promotion, right? How do you promote yourself? And I've talked about this as we've gone through social media, sharing to your platforms, right? And it's sharing not only to the unit's platform, but it's sharing to your personal platforms, right? You're the PAO, right? You have the unit's platform, but you have your own. You should be promoting your unit on your own platform because you should be proud of the work that you're doing, right? Hopefully, right? You should be tagging your own unit because that's the work that you're doing. So that's a great way. Website, draw the traffic to the website, right? Every chance that you get. So, and also tag other units, right? Tag the Army, tag, all the nonprofits that are tied. Those are great ways to draw. And here's the other thing. Sell yourself, right? Sell your unit's podcast to the other podcasts, right? It's called, cross-pollination, right? Contact the other podcast series. Say, hey, I'm so-and-so. We have a podcast, and this is what we do. Would love the chance to come onto your podcast series. And at the same time, would love to get you onto our podcast. And this is what we talk about. SOCOM has a podcast series out there. They've been doing really well. I know the Sergeant Major that runs that podcast series. And I know the editor that's behind the scenes that's been doing it for a long time, right? The military is a small world, right? You guys should know that, right? The circle, the degree of how we know each other and how we're connected is a small world. So I guarantee you probably know all the little podcasts that are out there once you actually start figuring out, like, oh yeah, I know Sergeant so-and-so or Lieutenant so-and-so who runs that. It is a small world. So get out there, get connected, get on each other's podcasts, right? Let me scratch your back if you're going to scratch mine. Let's have a conversation because we're all doing this to get out our message. So why not share, right? We're not in competition with each other. We are not in competition with each other. So let's share. And then collaborate, right? Collaborate with each other, right? There's forums out there. Like I know I'm in a Facebook group of 46 alphas and we share all the time of I'm in this struggle. I have this idea. What do you think about this? I've got this question. Share, right? I want to do this, or I've got this idea, or hey, I want to do this podcast. What do you guys think about this? Or anybody have this idea? Share and collaborate. Next slide. So the cost. This is the one that units always want to know. Next slide. So you could go internal versus contracting, right? Some units contract and some units are going to go all internal. And this is where, for the PAO, this is where your life is either going to get easier or it's going to get easier and fun or it's going to get easier and hard. So if you contract, you're going to contract to somebody who loves doing it and it's going to cost, like somebody like me, right? Or as a PAO, you're going to take on that burden. And I've been on both sides. So the going rate is about, on average, out there on the industry is $2,500 per episode. That is the going rate. And the reason why is $2,500 per episode is that soups to nuts, right? That is, the person is doing all your work, right? They're hosting it for you. They are doing the editing. They're launching it. They're running it for you. So that kind of gives your unit an idea, right? And then you can start negotiating with that person about, well, if they're not hosting it, if they're not the speaker, but they just want you to edit it, then you can have those discussions. But if you want to go internal, you guys are the host. So then you guys are just paying for certain fees, right? Because there's a fee for Buzzsprout, for Libsyn. Those fees aren't that much, right? I think Buzzsprout, is like $15 a month, right? So those are some things that you got to look at, right? There's equipment costs, right? You got to pay for the editing suite like Adobe and things like that. Many of you guys may already have that for the work that you guys do. It's just a matter of getting trained on that, sending you guys to school. Well, here you guys. DINFOS has got a lot of that training. It's just a matter of making sure that you're trained in that. Those are some of the hours that you're going to invest in, right? Do you have the bandwidth to do that? So those are the conversations that you've got to have with your command and understanding, Do you have the time, the bandwidth in your rucksack to be able to do that? And do they understand what they're about to put on your load? Or do they need to put maybe a contractor in your team to do that? Or maybe if they're giving that to you, something coming off your plate. At the end of the day, I highly recommend that the podcast is an effective tool that should be added to your repertoire, because it is a tool that can expand your team's ability to push your message effectively, faster than any other platform. We move at the speed of light 24/7, and the podcast is an effective tool to allow you to do that, especially for our millennials, right? Especially for our younger generation. It's part of what they do, right? They effectively use these tools so much more so than a lot of our command teams, more than I think that they realize. So why not add something that they already do, right? Meet them where they are already at. Next slide. So questions?
Olivia, real quick one. Someone asked you to repeat. What platforms do you use again for your podcast?
I use Buzzsprout.
Buzzsprout? Okay. You mentioned two, he said.
Libsyn.
Libsyn.
Hi, I'm Bethany Crouch with DISA Digital Communication. So I have two questions. One, which would you say performs better, audio only or audio and video? I listen to strictly audio podcasts. I particularly like fictional. So I'm not one to be on YouTube to watch something like Joe Rogan. But so I wanted to get your opinion on that. And also if you could talk about sustainability. You know, many of us, especially early in our career, will be going from organization to organization, or with military, you'll move on. So what would you say is a good approach to sustaining a podcast once it's created for an organization, especially if it's something that you want to keep consistent?
So audio is very powerful in itself as a podcast. I use the tool of video because video is king when you look at social media in itself. That's why I recommend doing the whole record your screen, to use that as a tool to promote your podcast. And also, people want to see your podcast, if you get what I mean, right? People want to connect with you. And so by recording your podcast, people can see who their host is and who their guest is, and allows them to feel that connection. So I personally feel that if you don't record a portion of that on video, you're missing out on that opportunity. Is it a wrong answer if you don't do that at all? No. I just think that it's a missed opportunity if you don't do that. To answer your second question, it is tough. I know that firsthand. When I left Soldier for Life knew that I left some giant shoes for them to fill. And they had a very hard time in trying to keep that podcast going. Did they eventually get it going? Absolutely, because they knew that it was important, and they finally got the episodes going, but it took them time. So does that mean that the unit may have to take a knee for a while in order to get that podcast going? Yes, that's the realism to that. But I truly believe that shouldn't be the reason for a unit not to do a podcast. And just like in any other job, you don't always get a backfill right away. It just means that maybe a job just doesn't get done for a little bit, and then it picks back up. And so I think at the end of the day, it's still an effective tool. And I think not doing it, a command team loses out on the ability to push messages. I think what a command team needs to look at is how often are they doing it. Maybe every single week is not the standard that they're doing it. When I was at Soldier for Life, I was pumping out literally an episode every single week. Now Soldier for Life isn't doing that because they didn't have the ability to do that because they just couldn't do it. And I think they've kind of tampered back a little bit. And I think that's just what a command just needs to do is what is the op tempo that they can handle.
And how far in the planning, how far out do you plan your episodes? Like, say if sustainability is the question, if that's what the commander wants to know, how are we going to keep this going? Do you go, say, 3 months out, a year out, where you've planned and prepared to produce all the way out to even a year? Is that feasible, or do you stick with maybe just a few episodes for a quarter, or what?
I went by quarter. And the reason why I did by quarter is because of the lock-in of the person that you're trying to interview. I think trying to do the standard Army long-range calendar of like trying to lock in, trying to get on a range, that doesn't work because people's calendars are always shifting. So trying to lock in someone you're going to interview a year later, that doesn't work because it's called life, right? Someone that you're going to interview a year from now, cool, you could pencil them in, but who knows what their life is going to be like. So for me, I think what is more realistic is a quarter.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, ma'am. So starting out trying to understand what a podcast was probably 4 or 5 years ago, I was kind of confused on when does it become a podcast or a video short, like using video? Is it just audio? I know you said you can make it what you want to make it. We're considering doing a short form, 4 to 5 minutes. If you could put constraints to define what a podcast is, where would that start? Where would that end?
So I think a podcast is how you want to define it, right? A podcast in itself is a audio program. It's an audio program that is developed by you to be shared on an audio wave, like an audio program. So Apple, Spotify. There are short programs. There are some audio programs that are 7 minutes long. There are some that are 10 minutes long, and there's some that are an hour and a half long. Podcasts have morphed in its definition from just being audio only to now audio and video. It is how you want to define what a podcast is for your unit in its messaging style, if that makes any sense to you.
It does. It's such a broad term that
It is.
trying to put it in a box is pretty hard these days.
It is changed so much because of the platforms in which we use, right? Many people use Instagram Live as a means to podcast, right? It is in a way in which we can send out the message. In its truest terms, podcast was an audio programming, but it has changed so much because of the ways in which we can share our message on so many of the different platforms. In fact, LinkedIn is also jumping on that bandwagon in how we can share some of that messaging. And there are changes on LinkedIn's platform, right? And those changes are coming right now. I'm aware of some of that because I'm part of its beta testing on some of the things that LinkedIn is going to do. So again, it's just using what's available in those tools and as a PAO to think outside the box and to use those tools to your advantage to get that message out there. And I think what's really important and the thing that I really stressed when I was in my last 6 years is meet your soldiers where they're at. And I think that was one of the hardest things that some of our senior leaders grappled with, is that I felt like a lot of our senior leaders wanted to stay where they were at. They wanted to command and lead and message from the front instead of meeting them where they're at. And I think we saw that problem when we had topics like Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate. And we can't do that anymore. We'll never be able to effectively lead and have those hard conversations with our soldiers and make change and have real conversations about mental health and stopping the stigma and breaking the silence if we don't meet our soldiers where they're at. Because the truth is, the Army, the Navy is not made up of lieutenant colonels. It's made up of E5s and below. And they're not going to look at our senior leaders and want to have a true conversations because the diversity is down there. The conversations are happening down there. And if our leaders aren't willing to have that conversation down there openly, then what are we doing? And that was a conversation that I had time and time again at ACBA. And I think we have to do that with the tools that we have. And I think a great way is let's use these tools for our leaders. Like, hey, sir, ma'am, let's use these tools to benefit you so that our soldiers, our sailors, our airmen, our Marines can see you as a person so that they can truly feel and see you as a person, that you put your pants on like they do. And it's not just lip service. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you.
Sure.
Olivia, I got another one. Are there specific topics or niches that you believe the military can talk about? And I guess more specifically, how would a unit even begin to figure out, all right, what topics do we want to speak on?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just started talking about that, right? Where I'm passionate about diversity, right? Diversity, mental health, sexual assault, sexual harassment. Like, come on, let's get real, right? And a good friend of mine sitting right here, Lieutenant Colonel Patterson. I was always that PAO that forced my leaders, and I got told a lot of times to shut up, because here's the truth. Those conversations happened when I was a lieutenant. And just because I retired last year doesn't mean that those conversations have stopped, right? And those conversations are still happening. It's why I'm an advocate for our military community. It's why I talk about mental health. It's why I'm open about suicide, because I had a brush with suicide, right? I worked with U.S. Army Soldier for Life. I knew all of the tools and the trade and all the resources about mental health, and yet I couldn't find help. And that's crazy, and I'm a PAO. So we as communicators should be leveraging our tools, our ability as communicators, as talkers, the fact that we have the ear of our leaders to tell them to get real, to get very real with their soldiers, their airmen, their sailors, their Marines. That their service members feel them at their level. And it's not lip service. Because that's what I hear, right? Those E5, E4s, E3s, they don't think that their majors or lieutenant colonels or colonels or GOs think that they get them. They think they're up here. And that everything that they say is just lip service. That they don't get them. And so these are tools that they can really have a conversation. When Sergeant Major Grinston talked about the fact that he actually, didn't talk about the fact that he was a minority person, right? That he actually is part black. People didn't know that because he was white passing during the time of Black Lives Matter. The fact that he was vulnerable enough to actually have that conversation made him more effective as a leader. Not because he was Command Sergeant Major of the Army. But who cared about that? Because for the first time, he had a legit conversation about who he was as a person. About a very real topic. That's an example. That's what soldiers want to hear. when you do that, when you have conversations about mental health, when you talk about how you're struggling as a leader and you're saying, I'm taking time out to go and seek mental health, that gives space and breath for others to do the same. And when we say we're going to actually do something about sexual assault, and not just say because, Congress told us to do so, then it allows those that have actually gone through it to believe in the system and to come forward. So I think those are some great topics that commands can talk about, and not just the things that we already do inherently about preparing to go to war and, field training. That you could do those with your eyes closed. Those are things that you put out in op orders. Those are things that you put out in whatever. Think outside the box. Use these as ways to communicate with your unit. Your soldiers are already doing it. And if you as leaders don't know what your soldiers are doing on social media, you are so far behind. Your soldiers are already creating some amazing pieces on social media. I laugh every single day when I watch some of these TikTok videos. And they are so amazingly creative. And because of them, I guarantee you they're helping us drawing people to come into the military service. They're helping to change the narrative on why service is so important. But yet we don't use them because it doesn't fit the mold. It doesn't fit the way in which we think we should be using them. I could go on. If you can't tell, it's a passion area of mine.
Hi. So you can create the best podcast in the world, but if no one knows that it's out there, it doesn't do anyone any good. So can you talk more about how you successfully promoted the podcast that you worked on?
So social media, right? Mm-hmm. It takes time to build a presence on social media. And it's why, it's important to build your brand on social media. And when you build your brand on social media, and when you start talking about who you are and what you do, and you start pumping it out on social media, then it's not a stretch. But it's also, using your friends, right? It's socializing it. And that's doing kind of, some of the things that I talked about. Reaching out to other podcasts. Hey, can I come on your podcast to talk about what it is that I do? And then you could come on mine. It's reaching out to your fellow, PAOs and saying, hey, can you, on your social media page, can you share about my podcast? It's a lot about doing that. It's some of the very simple tactics of marketing, right? LinkedIn is actually a very powerful, very, very powerful platform. If you do not already have a LinkedIn profile, I highly encourage you to have a LinkedIn profile. Because one day you will go through a thing called Soldier for Life for transition. And when you're ready, come find me and we'll have a long conversation on how to do that successfully, and I will help you. It is a very powerful tool. And so you've got to develop that. You've got to develop a brand of who you are in your unit so that when you develop your platform and your podcast, it goes hand in hand. And then, do all the standard things that you do as a PAO, right? Put it out in your local paper, put it out, through MWR. All those tactics that you do as a PAO, you would still do for your podcast.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Any other questions from the audience? I don't think I have anything online. All right, awesome. Olivia, thank you for your time. I appreciate you coming by. Very good information. All right, guys, we're going to take a short break, and we will be back with our next presentation, Missing Disinformation.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Very much. Appreciate it.
Of course.